Hello, everyone, and welcome to our monthly Tech Tuesday webinar. I'm Candy Mitchell, the Director of Marketing here at Coretek, and I'm your host today. Presenting today, and you can see him on the screen, is Chris Salda, our Senior Solutions Architect here at Coretek. Chris will be taking you through our web application modernization topic. But before he starts, let's just please note a few things. We do have the Q&A feature enabled, so if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in there, and we'll answer them at the end of the webinar. And we are recording today's webinar, and we'll send out a link to the recording and the slide deck once our event is over and it's live on the website. So without further ado, take it away, Chris.
All right, thanks, Candy. Well, welcome everybody. Today we'll be talking about web app modernization, specifically on Azure. And just to introduce myself, my name is Chris Salda. I'm a Senior Solutions Architect for our cloud solutions at Coretek Services. And what that means is I work with many of our customers with architecting their cloud solutions around Azure, and that's from infrastructure to applications to data. I also work with a lot of our customers around Microsoft 365, modern workplace, and really just helping them to really gain the value from cloud and really help them along their cloud journey with accelerating that in any way we can. One of those ways is around web app modernization, which seems to be a very hot topic these days. A lot of great benefits to it. And what we're going to do is kind of get to the agenda slide here to show you that we're going to be going through kind of what are the benefits of doing that, modernizing your apps in Azure, and then talk through the approach, kind of the mindset of how do you approach this of what do you modernize, why, how do you modernize it, and what kind of Coretek we recommend, what we've done. And we even have an example of a customer that we've done this with that we're going to go through as well too. We're going to get into talking about some tools to leverage when going through this journey of modernizing your applications, web apps in Azure, Azure DevOps and another tool. And then lastly, we'll just end with kind of how can Coretek help if you want to go along this journey. What options do you have to utilize, leverage Coretek to help you along this journey? So let's get started. Benefits. So a lot of benefits here with app modernization. You may have heard some, but I'm going to kind of go over this as a whole, starting from very kind of high level of general business benefits, getting into more of the more technical benefits of moving towards kind of the PaaS model. If you're not aware, is platform as a service, is typically what we're talking about when we're modernizing applications. We're moving them to a platform as a service type offering, and I'll explain a little bit more about what that is if you're not aware. So in general, you look at it from why you look at doing app innovation, modernization. You might hear it called either it fuels digital transformation, and I'm sure, that's a big buzzword these days. Most people have heard of that, but in general, what that means is that you're modernizing your applications for specific outcomes, and some of those outcomes are listed here, right? Very top of mind for every business, and it's really regardless of the industry, the shape, the size of your organization, and it's whether you're going to engage with customers in new and innovative ways, transform and differentiate your products, or create efficiencies in operations, or empower a new generation of millennials in the workplace. That's kind of how we see that generally outcomes is fueling digital transformation, both within and outside the organization. And so what we find here is that with this accelerating pace of change around us, every business just needs to innovate and change faster than ever before. And old infrastructure and the traditional ways of building apps are becoming really just growth inhibitors for businesses. They're not able to move as fast. They can't meet customer demands. The changing marketplace, as we've seen in the last couple of years, things have changed very quickly. How quickly can you innovate and meet your customers' needs or your internal employees' needs to be productive or to have more output from what meet your customer expectations more to be just more competitive in the marketplace, right? And a lot of that comes down to also around data of just closing that gap from decisions, using data to do that. But there's a lot of challenges with that. So much of the budgets are assigned for IT is assigned to keeping the lights on as opposed to innovation. And the demand for mobile apps is so much more capacity than what IT can usually provide. And only half of the decision makers really could get help from their technologists with the analysis needs to just move forward. So it's tough to move forward just in this traditional mindset that you may be in. thinking everything kind of on-prem, traditional IT. But there are some specific triggers here of why, in situations where app modernization can help with here. So it's really ideal if you need agility. So basically reducing time to market and cost. If you need scale for customer reach and engagement, and that's whether it's scaling up for, seasonal type of workloads and engaging those customers. Maybe it's scale on a global scale. It could be either, could be both. Security. I mean, that is a trigger too, to protect your data. Honestly, when you get to when you start modernizing your applications, you can actually realize a lot of just really benefits around security and things that are just handled for you. Innovation, right? We kind of mentioned this before, just driving innovation and market differentiation, being competitive in the marketplace. And the developer demographic too. That's really the skill sets are changing and, reducing the IT maintenance and costs and just improving flexibility. So these would be definitely triggers. And most of the customers I've talked to, I mean, at least one of these things is top of mind. So that's where application modernization might be a fit for you, if one of these at least is kind of a driver for your organization. So let's break this down. Let's break down the Azure migration journey in general. So there are different ways to go about getting to Azure, and we're going to talk about some ways, but I want to kind of look at the peripheral on either side of what we're talking about as modernization so that you have some context. So first is lift and shift. A lot of customers start here, and that's not a bad place to start. This is probably the quickest way to start leveraging cloud services like Azure. This in a way that's more like IaaS, like infrastructure as a service in most cases. It's also called a rehost. This is taking your VMs as they are and essentially moving them to Azure. There's tools to assess that and help you move that. Usually minimal changes are needed there. So a lot less kind of like overhead, let's just say, to get there. But the benefits aren't as high, I guess, if you say, if you're just only sticking with lift and shift. But that could be your first step on the journey. The next is application modernization. That's what we're here to talk about, right? With this, there are 3 different ways you can look at app modernization. You can look at it as refactoring, re-architecting, or rebuilding. Right? So there's just various levels here. We'll get into these a little bit deeper. And it really is, once you're in Azure here, it's about how do you keep your workloads optimized, continuously. Security monitoring, backups, OpEx spends, right? And that's where app modernization in these 3 levels here really allows you to do that a lot easier. And then the far end is replace. So it could also be that you have an application that you've built, or maybe it's already a third-party application off the shelf, and instead of lifting and shifting it or modernizing it, you might just look to a SaaS application. So a good example of this might be your email, right? So if you're running Exchange Server on-prem, sure, you could rehost that in Azure, right? Not really an app modernization option for that, so maybe not a great example there, right? But SaaS would be Microsoft 365, right? So no longer you having to even deal with the servers or the PaaS services. It's a SaaS service that's handled by some third party, and they're hosting it in the cloud somewhere, right? But obfuscated from you. So when we talk about where these pieces are, right? So we have on-prem is where you kind of start with, and you see IaaS is infrastructure as a service. So I think VMs, that's lift and shift. And then in the cloud there, going further to the right, refactoring, re-architect, rebuild, that's where you're using containers, has those application services, and then there's serverless options too. So to give you another idea about kind of diving now into that application modernization and what this means for you of using PaaS, the platform as a service. So the third column in is PaaS. And you'll see everything in blue is what Microsoft handles for you. That's their responsibility. Cloud is a shared responsibility model, meaning that there are essentially there are things that Microsoft's going to do for you. There are things that you still have to do. So if you start on the on-prem, obviously it's everything. You have to do everything on-prem. As you get to IaaS, great. Microsoft's starting to take more from you to handle, manage, monitor, secure, and an update, for example. Sort of virtualization, servers, storage, networking. As you get to PaaS, you start adding on Microsoft's taking care of the operating system, middleware, runtime. What does this mean for you? That means no more operating system updates, no more middleware updates, no more trying to make sure those services are running necessarily, because Microsoft's monitoring those things. There's auto healing, auto kind of remediation capabilities. auto scaling, a number of things. All you have to worry about is your applications and your data. So what that means with those budgets I mentioned earlier, where IT is spending so much of their time and so much of the budget just keeping the wheels on, right? That budget, basically, all that in the blue, that's not Microsoft handling that. Therefore, you can reallocate that budget to more innovation and more, adding value to the business to make yourself more unique, make yourself more competitive in the marketplace. So PaaS lets you just have, it's a little, like it says, there's some assembly required, but for the most part, a lot of the underlying capabilities you just don't have to worry about anymore and manage. So let's talk about the approach. Now we understand the benefits of where, you might want to go forward with app modernization, taking web apps to Azure and putting them in PaaS services. Let's talk about the approach. How do we get there, right? So the migration journey here, again, you got to start with a business case. You got to get through, executive sponsorship. You have to get business and IT alignment to really get started here. Hopefully you already have that. If not, that's something you want to start thinking about, because that is truly foundational to getting any sort of real traction here if you're trying to get the outcomes of modernizing your applications in Azure. And foundational, you have to make investments around technical capabilities, the tools you're using, and the skills that your people have, the processes that you're using, not only to move everything, but it's going to be manage and operate and monitor and secure. Those things are all going to have to be shifted a little bit, right? But that's okay. That's part of the journey here, and we'll get to this later. But there's partners like Coretek, and we've done this day in, day out. We help so many customers day in, day out get to that foundational kind of just setting up the foundations with cloud, with the people, the process, and the technology, so that they can move forward and not have to take steps back and slow down the overall journey. So what that means is we start with an assessment, looking at what you have, what you're trying to do, putting together that design. We migrate things, and then you optimize after that. So let's talk about those 3 R's: the refactor, re-architect, and we're going to get into this a little bit more. So refactor is going to be one of the first ways. So as we continue down this kind of going to the right, refactor is the simplest, right? And that's where you're going to gain some benefits over just rehosting. But yeah, you're going to get there a little quicker than going to to a re-architecture or rewriting type of method. So this is where you want to leverage what you have kind of existing. You like what you have. You don't need to make any major changes. If you want to just quickly get things modernized, right? This is the way to do it. And what this does is it still allows you to take advantage of built-in DevOps capabilities, PaaS services. You can use your existing programming models, languages, frameworks. Many, if not all the ones that you're using, are probably compatible, right, with these services. And it's very easy to scale up or down to meet the changing needs of the business, especially when we're talking about cloud. Cloud typically is a kind of pay for what you use. So if things are really slow overnight, why should you have all the instances running? Maybe you just go down to 1 or 2 small instances, and then on a schedule or based off of how much the demand is, it scales up to 5, 6, 7, 10 instances, right? So that you can handle that demand while giving the performance that your kind of end users and customers need. And so this is going to be app services, containers, DevOps tooling here. And so with Azure App Services, the idea is that this is very, very integrated with Visual Studio and the Azure DevOps tooling. There are some great features here, like being able to have staging and deployment slots, so that you can very quickly swap between your code releases, right? Swap to the new one, swap back to the old one. You can do A/B testing, blue, green, all those fun things, so that you can really kind of deploy how you want, right, of the new code base. So you can do some testing in production there. CI/CD is built in. We talked about auto scaling. Generally, this is available worldwide. There's hybrid support here too. There's some great features here. This is capable now with Azure Arc, where you could actually run this in any cloud, honestly, even on-prem now with Azure Arc, which is just phenomenal. It's truly hybrid. It's truly portable at this point. The next thing to look at would be containers. Now you can use containers in a lot of different ways. You can use containers on a VM. You can use containers on the app service we just mentioned. You can use a different orchestration service like Azure Kubernetes service as well too. But the idea here is that you have the agility here. You can ship apps faster. Typically, they're very portable. Like you can run those containers on your own laptop while your developers are developing those workloads and the code, and then you can very, very quickly scale out too. So there's a little bit more architecture that has to go with this, and a little bit more, let's just say, change that has to happen to get yourselves to a to a container solution that's going to work for you, as opposed to just moving a .NET code for web apps directly to app services, for example. And app services can actually run web apps. It can run APIs. There's actually web jobs it can run in the background too. So it's very flexible. And then containers, right? And then containers are really becoming the common currency of deployment as you're looking to really kind of rewrite some of the applications or maybe kind of re-architect some things. That's where that's changing the way developers develop applications. So that is something to look into. Containers are often really broadly accepted and they're an open standard. So that's why there's a lot of portability with those as well too. So a lot of capabilities within Azure that directly support containers. So it really comes down to what your needs are. So re-architect. When you want to re-architect is like when you want to modify or extend an existing application's code base to optimize the application architecture for truly cloud scale. So for example, you want to decompose a monolithic application and microservices that work together readily and scale, and re-architect your relational and non-relational database to Azure fully managed database as a service solutions, right? That's where you're going to gain a few more benefits there than just using the Refactor methodology. And so this is where you get the term microservice. So instead of using just a monolithic application approach where it's one server has all these apps on it, and so it's all kind of shared. Yes, that's good for on-prem. It shares resources, but you can't scale pieces of that independently is the problem. And getting API calls to be published, to be simple, it's sometimes hard because you're actually one server with multiple applications there. And what you do, and you see that on multiple VMs typically, and microservices application approach is that you have app one is consisting of a few microservices, app two is another few microservices, and they kind of get spread throughout multiple. In backend, everything's pretty much VMs in Azure, but it doesn't matter where they are at that point. Especially at this point, you're basically using containers to do this, and so you can scale those individually. You can add more containers to more servers for those specific microservices, and you gain a lot from doing that by decoupling those applications. Now, I want to show you real quick it's a reference architecture, kind of basic web app. This is kind of what it might look like if you're moving a basic web app into Azure after everything is said and done. So typically, right, starting from the left, you're going to have come in from the internet. You may have Azure Active Directory tied into that. Maybe it's the B2C capabilities with Azure AD. You may have Azure DNS hosting your DNS. Either way, you got to have some DNS, right? And it's going to go into your slots. You see the production, staging, and last good slots underneath the Azure App Service plan. That's App Services there in that box there. And that's going to talk to some sort of data, usually databases. And that's where you might have a SQL server. In this case, it's showing Azure SQL database. So this is a PaaS service for databases. And then you have some of the other pieces around like monitoring, log analytics, that type of thing. If we look at a scalable web app, reference architecture, you start to see a few more things show up here, like Azure Front Door Service, where that's going to handle actually traffic management between multiple regions where you might want to have your applications running. It has some acceleration for the connectivity, even some sort of little bit of CDN built integration there too, as you see Azure CDN below there. And then you may have a queue behind the web app that talks to a function app, which might then have a Redis cache behind there to speed up access to the data. And then the backend might be Cosmos DB even, not Azure SQL database. And then you add other services on like Azure Search, cognitive services, and the like. So just giving you a little idea of how you can expand that out You may start with the basic web app, maybe that's all you have today, but maybe you can decouple that a little more and add in a few more of these capabilities as you optimize. Doesn't necessarily have to be a day one. Another approach too is key, is the Microsoft Cloud Adoption Framework here from an approach perspective. And with that, this is the methodology that Coretek uses, and for all of our customers when we're helping them move to the cloud and helping them along their cloud journey, especially in a modernization perspective with web apps in Azure. So this is a framework that Microsoft has put together. You'll see the link at the bottom there. It's publicly available. Microsoft has a lot of great guidance here. Sometimes it'll be a little overwhelming if you look at all of it, but that's where a good partner can really help you navigate that and to help you understand what's most important now, and to help you along the journey to integrate and iterate as you go to add on additional capabilities here. But there are some baseline things that you need to do regardless. And part of that strategy, understanding where you're going, why you're going there, getting everybody aligned, planning properly around the cloud adoption. That includes a lot of the assessment pieces. Ready is getting you ready, getting the destination ready, what we call the landing zone ready in Azure. Designing that properly around identity, networking, security, governance, the subscription architecture, making sure all those things are in place so that you're ready to start migrating over. And lastly, on that top phase there is adopt, right? So migrate or innovate. In this case, we're talking more innovate when we're talking app modernization. So that's actually getting those applications and the data into Azure. And underpinning everything is governance and manage. So those are important too. Those have to be going kind of ongoing, in parallel, and continuously innovating and iterating on those as well too. So we actually there's a lot of programs we have that can help you actually at any stage of this journey, to make sure that you are following kind of that framework to ensure projects are going to be the most successful that they can be. So let's get in real quick to a web app modernization example. And so this is, just want to talk real quick about a real world example here where this is a customer they're a payment solution provider. They have a SaaS type application. Basically, they have these payment kiosks, and the SaaS application is sitting on-prem. It was sitting on-prem originally on just VMs, like most traditional IT has, right? And they really wanted to move that off those on-prem servers. They want to get rid of all those servers in their data center, so they needed to do something about that. But at the same time, they wanted to have a little additional agility, being able to scale out when they need to. They're expecting some growth, and they didn't want to have to buy more servers. They wanted more resiliency as well, with really reducing the overall management costs of not having to maintain the hardware as well as all the operating systems on all those as well too. And everything comes down to being a cost-effective solution too. So that original state is they had front-end servers with .NET applications, so web apps there, and then the back end was SQL Server, just your traditional SQL Server. So on the right side here, we'll show the key outcomes after Coretek was done here. This is what came out of it. Essentially, we performed an assessment, and we'll talk about some of these tools here, but the Azure App Service assessment tool, that is a free tool that you can use and is a great way to get started, especially for some of the more simple applications. They had a single .NET application, not a super complex one, but did have a couple dependencies like the SQL Server and some files. And we moved that to Azure App Service, just kind of natively there. Did not have to do too much remediation on that. There was a couple of small things that came out of the assessment tool, but we're able to get past that pretty quickly. And then the SQL Server, we moved that to Azure SQL Managed Instance so that was also on PaaS. And all in, assessment through the modernization in production, by the way, this is a production deployment, is performed within 3 weeks. So we were able to move pretty quickly with them, mainly because they really didn't have a lot of technical debt. They didn't have a lot of compatibility issues we had to work through. And they already were set up in Azure too, for some IaaS already. So able to move pretty dang quick with them. And we were also able to set up CI/CD. They use Visual Studio and the Azure DevOps to push their application updates to the app service deployment slots. So now they're able to have much quicker deployments and be able to switch back and forth between that latest release and last known good if there's a problem. So they can have a lot more confidence in having more releases more often. All right, so let's get to the tools here. So tools, there's a number of tools that can help with this journey. So besides the process and the people and getting all those pieces together, there's some tools that you're going to need really to help you get there on this journey and not hit a lot of roadblocks and have to go backwards, right? So a lot of that comes down to assessments, and then we're going to talk a little about infrastructure as code. So one of the assessment tools we really recommend and try to use wherever we can is the UnifyCloud Cloud Pilot Assessment Tool. So here's a quick screenshot here. What it does is it looks at the actual source code repositories. You don't even have to look at a live server for this necessarily. And it's looking at all of the compatibility issues that you might have with various types of, destinations, whether it's app services, whether it's containers, whether it's functions. And it highlights those specific things that you're looking for that might be incompatible that you're going to have to remediate. And it assigns at least a kind of estimated work effort, like how long is this actually going to take per each one of these items to remediate. So they have a bunch of algorithms and a lot of kind of IP behind that, but it really generally helps you to understand, okay, how much would this app take to get into Azure and to modernize it? And where we use this too, you may look very narrowly at a single application, or you may look at a portfolio and say you have 10 or 100 applications, right? And use this tool to look at all of them, and that might help you prioritize which ones to do first. So you can compare, the value, the outcomes that you'd be getting out of it. How much value would it be to move this application to, and modernize that in Azure versus the cost, right? Like how much of a low-hanging fruit is that, and balancing that so you can actually rationalize where to start, right? Because that's a lot of the problems sometimes is just I don't even know where to start, right? And this helps give you a lot of insights into that. And their premium tool here, there's an add-on here that will actually let you have that you give you the code to actual change. Like just run this code and you will fix the issue. So that'll even further accelerate the remediation there too. So great tool here. As I mentioned earlier with the example customer, the other tool in this area for assessing your web apps for Azure, in this case specifically Azure App Services, is the App Service Assessment Tool. So it's free from Microsoft. It gives you the telemetry around what the incompatibilities are, gives you a little bit of guidance, doesn't give you super prescriptive guidance necessarily, nor does it give you like the efforts estimation and a few other things. So that's more of a basic tool. This is definitely more of a comprehensive tool, if you will. It's something that is actually included in some of these solution assessments, which I'll mention later on as something that Microsoft may even pay for you. So that's the assessment piece. So that's getting everything assessed, understanding where to go, when to go, which apps to focus on. Next, I'm going to talk about tooling-wise is Azure DevOps. You might be familiar with. Just in general, you can use that to deploy, CI/CD, your applications, and continuous integration and deployment, even on-prem, right? Even to VMs, you can do that for your application code. But what we find is that a lot of organizations, while they may be using that for their actually application code deployments, they're not using that for their infrastructure. And within the cloud, there's a huge opportunity there. So what I'm going to talk about here is just, cloud native systems, especially ones that, they embrace microservices, containers, modern system design, those PaaS services to achieve that speed and agility. They provide automated build and release stages to ensure consistent and quality code. But that's only part of the story, right? So that's that application code deployment. But how do you provision those cloud environments upon which those systems run, right? So how you provision those resources where you're going to be deploying your code or running your databases, let's just say. The modern cloud native applications, they widely accepted practice. They embrace the widely accepted practice of infrastructure as code, or some call it just IAC. And with IAC, infrastructure as code, you automate the platform provisioning, and you essentially apply software engineering practices such as testing and versioning right to your DevOps practices. And your infrastructure deployments are automated, they're consistent and repeatable. And just as continuous delivery automated the traditional model of manual deployments, infrastructure as code is now evolving how application environments are managed from an infrastructure perspective. So you'll find tools like Azure Resource Manager, Terraform, Azure Command Line Interface. Those enable you to declaratively script the cloud infrastructure you require. And you'll see there just that little graphic there, very similar to how you do this from a very software focused perspective. Now you can do that from an infrastructure perspective. Highly recommend this. We're doing this now with the vast majority of customers on all the products we're doing, as far as getting those environments stood up in Azure as code. There's just a lot of benefits to that. Other things too is that when we talk about repeatable deployments, not just to the same environment, but let's say if you're using truly multi kind of environments for dev, tests, it's QA and prod, right? Just like as an example, just like you are deploying your application code in that way, you can use infrastructure as code to deploy the underlying infrastructure to ensure that that's consistent. And you can test those deployments, right? So develop those deployments in dev and deploy. Great, that works to stand up this new app service here and in the backend database. And then you do it in, you do in the test, and then that works, then you push it out to production. And with Terraform, there's a lot more capabilities around kind of ensuring that the health of everything is right. There's no config drift, if you will, and it helps you to even remediate that. So that all can be done. When I say Terraform, right, that's HashiCorp, that's a third party, but there's a lot of hooks into Azure DevOps. It works very seamlessly with that. That is our primary mode of infrastructure as code, is Terraform with Azure DevOps. So now that we've talked about the benefits of modernizing your web apps in Azure, our approach and some things to think about on getting there, as well as some of the tools that can help out. Well, if you're here and you still want to go forward, right, and want to look at potentially modernizing some of your web apps in Azure, how can Coretek help? So there's a number of ways. First is a great program that Microsoft has provided. This is through the Solution Assessment Program, and this is the Azure Application Innovation Solution Assessment. This, if you are qualified from a Microsoft customer perspective, and many of our customers are qualified for this, you can modernize up to 5 applications, basically with Microsoft helping to fund that for you and working with a certified partner. Coretek, we are a certified partner in this program. Not a huge amount of partners in this program. It's pretty rigid in terms of the expectations of partners in this program, because they want the very best working with their customers. And what we do is architecture design. We look at those 5 applications. We typically are using UnifyCloud, Cloud Pilot, like I mentioned earlier, to look at the source code repos and see, which applications make sense to move to Azure, to modernize to Azure, and then look at the, what remediation is required. So putting together that migration plan to help understand how to get from here to there. Get the gap analysis of anything that you might already have Azure set up, but maybe there's some gaps there as far as starting to use PaaS services that you need to consider. So we look at that and help you understand what you need to do. And basically, this becomes a paid engagement, typically 3 to 5 weeks, maybe, depending on the complexity of what we're working with. But it's a great way to get started, honestly. And then there's another program here, AMMP. So AMMP is the Azure Migration and Modernization Program. This is also another program that you have to be a qualified partner to be part of. And what this helps you do is to do the assessment and planning, which is really includes that app innovation engagements I talked about just a second ago. The migrate and modernize, that's where actually Microsoft's going to help pay for this. That's really the key thing here, is getting everything set up with the landing zone, like I mentioned before, in the ready phase, getting everything then actually modernized, migrated over to Azure. That's what Microsoft is helping to pay for with this program here. And then, post that, there may be some governance and manage things that you may need. That's where you may work with a partner there, like Coretek, maybe with our managed services team, to help you with ongoing governance and management. So another great program. Many customers qualify for this as well too. Just a matter of checking with us and seeing if you qualify. Our specific approach here is we try to break this down into 4 phases. We'd start with phase 1 of planning. That's where we're defining that scope of, we're looking right now about 1 to 5 applications, spanning about 20 VMs or 5 databases. And we're looking at goals and objectives, utilizing tools like UnifyCloud, maybe Azure Migrate if we do have to move some VMs that are dependent, right, on those apps, those applications otherwise that aren't going to be moved to PaaS. Using the database migration assistant to look at the databases to see if we can move those to PaaS, and looking at dependencies overall. Next, we look at doing an architecture design and review. So we dive pretty deeply into what that what are things going to look like in Azure, and kind of uncover everything that could be a risk there, and help you to understand what that's going to look like. And that includes looking at the the landing zone, making sure that's going to be set up properly and designed properly, and making sure that we don't have any gaps regarding like foundational governance principles. Phase 3 is actually migrating or modernizing in this case. And that's where we're going to develop that specific migration strategy and plan for you. We would produce a deliverable for you with your sign off before we move forward with the actual migration. And then we would also be able to do some Azure Architect design kind of documentation using Cloud Docket. Lastly, that's where we're going to kind of get everything kind of modernized there. We're going to remediate any PaaS compatibility issues that are identified, deploying the PaaS services, ideally using infrastructure as code via Azure DevOps, and migrate all these in-scope applications and databases to PaaS. And there might be some VMs that come along with that too. But that's just a high-level overview of how we work, and that's our approach that's been proven to help our customers move quickly, but yet safely, right, to these Azure services. So before we kind of end here, a few things is some additional content. We have a lot of great content and videos here that we've produced to help you along your cloud journey, whether it's around Azure, whether around security, hybrid cloud, whether it's around modern workplace, some really great content, case studies, blogs. So check that out at our website, coretek.com. And then, yeah, next steps here is really if you need help getting started, right? You want to just talk about this. Maybe this is new to you. You want to just kind of understand what it would take. Feel free to call us, shoot us an email. We'd be happy to qualify you for any of those funding programs that Microsoft has to see if that's a way that we can get you kind of jump started, if you will, and accelerate your journey to modernizing your applications in Azure. And that's basically all I have. And I don't know if I see any. Is there any questions, Candy, that we pulled?
No, I don't see any questions in the chat today, but thank you, Chris. This is very informative. If you do have questions, go ahead and visit our website at coretek.com, or you can reply to the email that we send out that will contain the recording of the webinar and today's deck. So thank you very much, everybody, for attending, and we will see you next time.
Hey, thank you.